All right, we are live. And on today's episode, I interview a transformational men's coach who specializes in helping men restore their masculinity and save their marriages. He's also a YouTube creator and author. You could find him at The Sovereign Man on Instagram and on YouTube, the underscore sovereign underscore man. Welcome to the winner circle, Matt Enns.
Thank you so much for having me, Derek. I'm really happy to be here and have a good conversation today.
Yeah, I'm excited to explore your hero's journey, and all these conversations are designed to just help the listeners and everyone tuning in just to move forward with greater faith and belief in themselves on their personal journeys. Um, and these conversations tend to be very like uplifting, inspiring, and empowering. And this first question sets us up as such, and that is, Matt, what do you love about your personal world right now? Not about the external world, but what you love about your personal world.
I love the emotional place that I'm at. I'm sure we'll get into this through the hero's journey conversation, but I experienced an enormous amount of anxiety, especially social anxiety, stress, sleeplessness, kind of always just running everything over in my head and never really being present in the moment. And through a lot of work that I've done, I'm at a place now where I get to experience inner peace as kind of my default mode. And having lived the first 30 years of my life being ashamed of who I was and hiding and being dishonest and doing things I shouldn't do and hurting people, and then feeling horrible about all of that all the time. Being in this new place, it really feels like a different life, and every day really does feel like a gift. The fact that I just feel good inside of my own skin and that I'm calm and I don't spend my time thinking about the past and the future, but I spend my time being appreciative of where I'm at. And that's enabled me to do kind of the second part of the answer to that question, which is what I do for work. And the fact that what I do for work is such a close match to what I'm good at and what I'm passionate about and what I'm interested in. And I get to impact people. Spending my days doing that from a place of calm and gratitude is a really, really beautiful place to be. And so that's definitely the best thing about my personal life right now.
Beautiful. I read about a little bit about what you do for work in my intro, but how would you explain to the listener or someone like what do you do?
Yeah, so transformational men's coach. And what that used to look like is I help people find their purpose, transition to a career that's more aligned with their purpose. And we did a lot of work on performance and discipline, daily routines, that sort of thing. And I kind of just fell into relationship coaching, which was never something I was particularly drawn towards. But I kept having, these incredible transformations with people with their internal world or their anxiety or their anger or their self-confidence. And they'd say, that 45 minutes we did on relationships was the most impactful of everything we did. And I was thinking, like, I have some very high performing clients who achieve some like things that you would have heard about, these enormous accomplishments. And that was the most impactful thing. And so I kind of fell into it over time. And so now what I do is I incorporate a lot of that into my current coaching, but the primary focus is helping men save their relationships. So that's men whose wives are either thinking about ending the relationship or actively pursuing divorce and figuring out, okay, how do we rescue this thing so that you can keep your wife, keep your family together, and have a connected, happy, fulfilling relationship.
hmm Amongst all your clients that are having difficulties in that area of the relationship, what is the common thread that you see amongst all of them?
Oh, men and women just not understanding each other. Um, so you and I, roughly the same age, I imagine. And our generation did not grow up with fathers who explained to us how women worked. We also didn't grow up with role models on TV that showed a healthy version of masculinity and how to be a good husband. They were all some version of Homer Simpson, right? Kind of bumbling around with good intentions, but completely incompetent. And the whole world is kept together by this long suffering wife. So
Yeah.
no one ever taught us how women operate, how to relate to them, how to be a good husband, what that actually looks like in practice. And on the flip side, for women, um, they've kind of been taught that there is no such thing as healthy masculinity. It's all toxic, it's all controlling, it's all abusive, it's all manipulative. Masculinity itself is a threat. And so, although women all on some deep level want a strong, secure, independent, decisive man that they can rely on, if that man starts to show up, they immediately castrate him because it represents a threat to them. And
Mm-hmm.
so neither men and women are getting what they want from their partners, and they don't know how to actually communicate with their partners because men and women communicate very differently. So she thinks she's been telling him what she needs for 10 years. He has no idea that she's communicated any of it because she didn't do it in a way that he understands. And so both partners kind of want the same thing, but neither of them know how to communicate that to the other partner so they actually get what they want, they can give what they want. And so it's just kind of this like men and women just flying past each other, wanting the same things, but neither of them getting at all what they need in a relationship. And so that's pretty much 100% of the people that I work with, that dynamic is going on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So how do you help merge those two differing poles?
Yeah, so I only work with men. So I work at it exclusively from the masculine perspective. What can he do to create changes that will heal the relationship? And the wonderful thing about that is, although it would be more effective on some levels to work with men and women, and I just don't enjoy working with women in the same way. I don't feel a call towards that. I really like to coach exclusively on issues that I've personally faced.
Yeah.
Um, and having never been a wife myself, I don't know what that's like. So I don't like to coach women in the same way, although I do have some female clients. Um, but the wonderful thing is that when the man changes in relationship, she will usually change in response to that. And men really need to learn how to be men, how to be fathers, how to be husbands. Women, it comes much more innately and naturally to them. And so if the man is showing up the way he's meant to, she doesn't really need to learn how to show up as the woman she's meant to show up as. She can just be there. And so although I only work with men, that's usually all that's necessary, right? Because you can have a wonderful, healthy, happy woman that won't necessarily produce a wonderful, healthy, happy husband. But if you have a wonderful, healthy, happy husband, almost always that will produce very, very quickly the same thing in his wife, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can only work on the man and get the results that you need to get.
Yeah, and as a man or as a woman, like you can only work on 100% of your half.
Yeah, and that's so important. And it's important for men and women to both take that accountability. But I would say, and this is, not politically correct. And again, politically correct is not the same as correct. That's why there's two different terms.
Uh-huh.
But this is not politically correct, but it's more important for the man to take that extreme ownership, right? That's why Jocko has more male followers than women. Men are more drawn to that message. And
Yeah.
when you do take that extreme responsibility in the relationship and you treat everything like it's your problem and your solution that's going to fix it, it's amazing how everything begins to change, right? If you think about the king archetype, and archetypes are basically mental categories that allow you to recognize a whole bunch of different versions of the same thing, right? So you can think of like the archetype of a tree. If you know that archetype, you can recognize an oak and an, you know, spruce, whatever. You can recognize a bunch of different trees. And the king archetype, you see it played out a lot in movies, right? And the best example, because they did it on purpose in this movie, is The Lion King. Um, when the king is right, the kingdom is right. And when
Mm-hmm.
the king is wrong, the kingdom begins to fall apart, which is why when Scar takes over, clouds cover the sun, it's raining, there's lightning, all the trees die, all the plant life goes away, all the animals leave. And when Simba, the return of the king happens, when Simba comes back, all of a sudden the kingdom begins to heal, vegetation begins to grow, the sun breaks through the clouds, the prey animals return to the pastures. And the reason why we can watch a preposterous movie about lions like that and it rings true in it and it makes us feel emotional is because it's true on an individual psychological level. If you, as the king of your life, of your existence, of your family, are right, the kingdom around you will begin to become fertile, will grow, will expand, will heal. And so, men, as much as we're put down in culture, men are vital to everything that matters. And if you, as the man in your life, can become that king, your kingdom will kind of take care of itself. It's amazing how that works.
Mm-hmm. And is this in context of like established relationships? Um like I've heard your past conversations on different podcasts, is on Instagram, on YouTube, and you're generally talking about people in relationships. What about for someone that is single? Like I don't know if that would always
Mm-hmm.
work. If you take care of your castle, sometimes like the person that you're trying to match with is just not there's just not a misalignment. Even if your house is in order, they have issues that they haven't dealt with, and that bond hasn't been established to give you time to work through that. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's definitely the case. But and I can maybe harp on this a little bit too much, but almost always when there's something going wrong in your life or not working out the way that you want it to, there is an internal problem that's manifesting externally. And so if you're attracting women into your life who are unhealthy and who are unwilling to work on themselves and won't make those corrections, that's a sign that there's something wrong in your kingdom to begin with. Because if you really have your shit together and you've built this big, beautiful castle that's very safe and very loving, you will attract somebody who can very easily integrate herself into that and who can be very easily appreciate that. And if you're consistently attracting people that are telling you the castle isn't good or something needs to change or they're unwilling to do their own work, there's probably an issue with the kingdom that you've built.
Yeah, so let's delve into that deeper. Like I heard on the social disorder podcast, you were talking about like the guy that keeps on meeting like that's the same girl at the same bar, they look the same and they're getting the same results, and then all their friends are like, what are you doing? So that was an example that I heard you talk about. But yeah, could you kind of elaborate on this discussion on, yeah, something's wrong with your, so that guy in that example, what is wrong in his castle?
Yeah, it depends what kind of girl he's attracting, right? But let's say that he keeps kind of attracting these toxic relationships where there's always drama or there's cheating or there's like just always something going on that's creating chaos in his life. Something about him is attracting or chasing girls who are unhealthy and toxic and want that kind of drama, right? And we all know somebody like that, even if it's a woman who keeps attracting like abusive men into her life. It's like, how many times can that happen in a row before you go, maybe I'm playing a role in bringing these people into my life, right? And
Yeah.
a simple one there is like, well, if you're only trying to meet women at a bar, maybe that's part of the issue. Maybe the women that you're looking for don't hang out at bars and don't want to hook up with somebody at 2 a.m. after 15 shots, right?
Yeah, so let's use an example more closer to home for me. And I think you could understand this one too. And so it's the classic like anxious avoidant like dance, like the oil in water. And I'd say like I definitely feel like I'm secure, but in trauma, like I'll go towards anxious, and then generally I'm attracting avoidant, and
Mm-hmm.
then like they want to leave, and I want to try to resolve things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's like a classic um,
That's the most common dynamic that I see too.
common dynamic. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's analyze that, the anxious avoidant dance. And
Yeah.
my understanding of it is like you're trying to heal, and I think with all relationship, you're trying to heal like wounding from your childhood, and resolve like issues with your own parents, with your own mother or
Mm-hmm.
father, and then so then you're attracting relationships to try to fix those wounds from the past.
Yeah. So when that's the case, like let's say you're anxious, and to be honest, most people who are embarking on a journey of self-development are the more anxious types because the avoidants don't want to dive into it, right? But the anxious
Yeah.
people are like, I gotta fix this up. What could it be? Could it be this? Could it be that? So it's really, really common. And that was certainly me to an enormous degree. I used to have anxiety, social anxiety to the point where I would talk to my girlfriend or my mom on the phone and I would lose my voice, like I was speaking in front of a crowd of 10,000. So I had it bad. Um, and what that speaks to is at some point in your life, you receive love and support from somebody in an inconsistent way,
Yeah.
right? And so you had to play a bit of a guessing game all the time. Like, who do I need to be today? And how do I need to communicate to manage this other person's emotions so that they'll be in the right place to give me what I need? And usually it's mom, it can be dad, but most often it's mom, right? So that can be, hey, mom, um, you're standing on my foot and it really hurts. Well, how could you possibly say I'm such a bad mom? How could you be so unappreciative? Don't you know that I sacrifice everything for you and I love you more than anything? And then the conversation ends with you consoling her and getting her back into a good place and making her feel better, completely ignoring what matters to you because you need to get that love and support from your mom. And if you coddle her in that way and make her feel better, then she'll tell you you're a wonderful son. She'll give you the hug and the kiss that you need and she'll tuck you into bed. And if you don't address those root causes, that dynamic keeps playing out. And so you attract somebody into your life who kind of fits with that. And then as soon as they start being unhappy or they start pulling away, and even if they're just pulling away because they're just somebody who needs more space than you do and they're securely attached, you interpret that as like, oh no, I'm losing my source of love and support. It's probably because she's angry at me because my mom wouldn't always tell me when she was angry and I had to figure it out. And so now I've got to chase this person down and I'm not going to feel good about myself until they give me what I need, which is telling me everything's okay. I still love you. I'm still committed to this relationship. I'm happy with you. now I can calm down and I can feel good again. And
Mm-hmm.
that dynamic, until you can provide that security to yourself, that dynamic will just play out. The universe will give you opportunities to learn the lesson that you need to learn until you learn it. And if you're being given a lot of opportunities, it's a sign that there's a lesson you really need to learn.
Mm-hmm. So how did you learn that lesson?
So for me, I was very interested in philosophy and ideas and psychology to some degree for a very long time. But there's kind of a missing piece, which was these are not theoretical intellectual ideas. These are internal phenomenon that you're trying to basically understand on a logical level. So I had to kind of turn it inward on myself. And
Mm-hmm.
I was listening to a Jordan Peterson video, and he said, if you have any memories that are older than 18 months that you still have a strong emotional response to, it's because there's lessons there that you haven't learned yet. And so you can't really move forward until you learn those lessons. And to put it in my own language, when you have that kind of emotional response to older memories, it's because your survival alarm system is going off. And it might be something really silly, like, the barista at Starbucks gives you kind of a dirty look, and you respond like it's like you get like a racing heart, and you don't know what to say, and your face turns red, your palms get sweaty. Your body's interpreting that as a survival issue. And so the alarm
Mm-hmm.
system is going off. And what that means you need to do is look back and say, where did I start developing this relationship where I interpret that as a survival event? And if I reinterpret that memory from a mature adult perspective, the next time it happens, I won't view it as a survival threat because I'll understand what it actually is. And I won't have that same default emotional response. So, what I started doing, because every memory that I had about anything produced a very strong emotional response in me. And my day was going through 50, 100, 200 flash memories all day and having a panic response to them all. I started to go back through those memories one at a time. Excuse me. And what I found was like there was a lot of these memories because I'd been kind of hiding everything from myself. I'd always just been like, ignore the feelings, move on, don't think about it, hide it, pretend you're not feeling uncomfortable, pretend you're fine, act your way through life so that people at least think you've got your shit together and you're calm, cool, and collected. And I had to realize that I was like 99% just completely full of shit. I was acting all the time. I was trying to look smart or look cool or look kind. I wasn't actually trying to be those things. I was trying to look those things. So I'd read a book, and instead of trying to learn the lessons of the book, I try to remember what I could use from that book that would make me sound smart later. And at the time, because I was so revved up in a sympathetic nervous system and just had anxiety and cortisol through the roof, I could never sleep. And so I was taking edible marijuana to help myself fall asleep. I was also usually drinking every single day, to the point of being drunk. But at this time, I was drinking a little bit less and I was taking a lot of really high doses of edible marijuana. And when you ask yourself a question that you don't want to know the answer to, when you're on 30 milligrams of indica cannabis, like you're going to get the answer. And so there was a period of about a year and a half where for 1 to 3 hours a day, I would just lay in bed with my eyes closed, high out of my mind, dissecting every memory that I possibly could that would come up. And it took like a year and a half until memories kind of stopped popping up. And so I reinterpreted essentially my entire life. And I realized during that process that there were so many things that I thought were the end of the world that weren't, because it was a painful memory. So I tried to ignore it. And it wasn't until I returned to those memories, learned the lessons contained within that memory, that I actually began to heal. My default emotional reaction began to shift. And I began to slowly start to learn to live in a place of calm. Now, luckily, that journey that I went to is not the journey that I take clients through, because I basically had a personality collapse. Like things got much worse before they got better for me because it was too much too fast and I didn't have the training. So I can take clients through that year and a half long process in a few hours in a very safe and manageable way. But I was figuring this all out for myself. I wasn't comfortable asking for help at that time.
So
But it,
what did, oh, go ahead, sorry.
no, no, go ahead.
I said, what does worse look like? Like,
Oh, um, my alcoholism didn't get any better. Um, my marriage began to fall apart because I was finally starting to kind of see all the problems in it that I've been hiding from myself, especially my role in them. But even as it was falling apart, and it was mostly the marriage that was falling apart at that time. Um, my personal life began to get better in small ways. Like I just had less anxiety during the day. I could have conversations more easily. I could assert myself more easily. I began to do better in my career. Things finally started clicking financially for me. So a lot was getting better during that time. But what I mean when it got worse is like when you realize you're carrying 1,000 pounds of dead wood behind you everywhere you go, and you acknowledge that for the first time, and you become aware that you're dragging it behind you, it's very overwhelming, and it can make it seem kind of like this is not something I can overcome. But
Okay, yeah.
as I dug through it, it got better, and I saw these little glimmers of hope and less anxiety and things starting to get better and feeling more comfortable in my own skin. So it was still a positive enough experience that I kept going with it.
Yeah, I just asked that because like on one of your appearances on social disorder, you're talking about people that use like psychedelics to kind of help or try to self-medicate and then they break their brain.
Yeah.
And so like is that kind of what you're describing or what would you
Yeah,
mean by break your brain?
there's a little bit of that. So I'll go through both of those. So for me, it wasn't so much that I broke my brain. It was more that I had a very bad self-image and a very bad internal psychological structure that I used to navigate the world. But at least I had a structure. And I didn't know how to build a new structure, but I knew that, hey, this structure I have isn't very good. So I basically just disassembled the whole thing.
Yeah,
But then
okay.
there was nothing left. There was no
Yeah.
me. There was no, how do I handle this situation? How do I respond to this? Because I knew the old pattern of responding wasn't good, but I didn't have a new pattern to replace it with. So I was just kind of lost, didn't know who I was, didn't know how to do anything. There was no me
Yeah.
left.
Yeah.
That's and so that's part of why with my clients we integrate building a new superior structure at the same time as we're undoing the old one, so that they don't have to experience that time without an internal structure like I did. But with psychedelics, it's a little bit different. If you've never done any of this internal exploration, you don't know the demons in your own head. You don't know, why you became the way you are in a negative sense. You don't know any of that. And you take 5 grams of mushrooms, you're going to meet all of the demons in your head at the exact same moment. And that can just completely destabilize you and break your brain. And that's why people have these kind of personality collapses after a really big dose of psychedelics that they never really recover from because it was too
What does
much too
that
fast.
what does that like collapse look like? I like what does some like yeah, from your experience with your clients or just people you know, like what does that collapse, how does that manifest?
So I don't know anybody who's really been through this or that went through it when I knew them. I've kind of just heard about it through people who've been through it or third party examples.
Uh-huh.
And what that can look like, for example, well, I'm going to leave my family, quit my job, and move to an ashram and just do yoga for the next 2 years and like just give up everything that matters to them and run away from all of it. Or they kind of just get traumatized. They don't know who they are anymore, and they lose their ability to kind of act in the world, similar to the way that I did, but in a more kind of deep, permanent sense where they're just for the next 3 years, like they're just not functional, and they kind of slowly rebuild themselves into some kind of function. But they were genuinely traumatized because all those dark parts of myself that I met over that year and a half. If I was to have met all of them at the exact same time when I was high out of my mind, I mean, I had no capacity to hold that kind of darkness. So it would have completely just knocked me over.
Hmm. Very interesting. Okay, so let me like rewind things a bit. So when you went through this kind of dissembling of all your past patterns, you're already in a relationship with your wife, Whitney. When did that relationship start and what like was problems in that relationship the thing that triggered you to go into that brain?
Yeah, that's why I love what I do, because the thing that I love to do is work with men who are in pain and help them become confident, superhumans. And that kind of requires a dark night of the soul, a crisis, a rock bottom of some kind. And the number one, and even if you read the literature on this, the number one reason that, or the number one sort of manifestation of that or opportunity for that in the modern industrial age is separation or divorce for men. So
Yeah.
that collapse, and that's definitely what happened. If I was by myself, and women are amazing at this, I would have never noticed all of my own flaws. But if you've got some flaws, I guarantee you, your wife will find them. And you can look at that as her being an unappreciative, critical bitch, or you can look at that as her wanting you to find that stronger, better, smarter, faster version of yourself. And um, when my relationship really was falling apart, and I recognized very, very slowly, and I'm so grateful that Whitney was so patient, because a lot of women would not have waited nearly as long as Whitney did to say, hey, I can't do this anymore. Um, when I finally realized, like, whoa, I'm a bit of a wreck and my life isn't that great, but the one thing that I know I really care about is my family and my wife and my kids. And like, I might be losing my wife and I might be losing my kids half of the time. Like, that was a wake up call.
Yeah.
And that was the only reason why I was willing to look at myself in such a deep way, was I was like, this is do or die. Like, I have to figure out what is wrong with me, because although she seems crazy a lot of the time, I know she's not crazy. And I know like she's got to be right about a little of this. And it took me a long time to admit that, because for the first years, it was she's unappreciative and she doesn't get it. She doesn't amazing realize what a good husband I am. And she's going to regret it. But when I finally started thinking, like, you know what, she might have a point here. Um, and I better figure this out quick or I'm going to lose the only things that I care about. That was the kick in the ass that I actually needed to be willing to go inside of myself and look at those dark parts.
And like you're really lucky that you had like the partner that was able to be like there for you and have that like be a secure base for you in a way.
Big time.
Um for clients of yours where they don't have that, then like how do you like they have to establish that security with themselves. And that also means to walk away from someone that's not able to um root themselves in security as well, I believe, right?
Yeah. So funny, it's not so much that I had that foundation of safety with Whitney that enabled me to do the inner work. It was just terror of losing her.
Okay.
And so I didn't have any foundation of safety with her. I had exactly the opposite. I had a constant reminder of my inadequacies with somebody who's really trying to love me, but just couldn't make it work.
Okay.
And that was a wake up call. And then that's the same thing with all the clients I work with, is like, when they finally realize, like, if I don't get my shit sorted, I'm going to lose everything that matters to me, my wife, my kids, half my money, my social circle, maybe my job. That's then like, okay, I better actually take some ownership and look at this and say, how can I reset things and become a better person? Um, but if you're not thrust into it in that unfortunate but often healing way, if you're on your own, the thing to do is just to be really honest with yourself. And it's very difficult to be honest with yourself. It's more difficult than almost anything else, because by the definition of what it is to be human, we hide things from ourselves in order that we can pretend we're better, smarter, cooler than we actually are. And so if you've been lying to yourself about something for 20 years, everybody around you is going to have a much easier time recognizing that lie than you will, because you've been creating the lie in a way that's designed to trick yourself. So being honest with yourself is very difficult. Um, but to begin that process of looking inward and saying, where am I not being the man that I could be or the woman that I could be? You can just take out a pen and paper, or you can close your eyes and ask yourself and just say, hey, if I'm really honest with myself, what's a kind of benign example to use? Am I really as kind of person as I think I am? Or what's a quantifiable one? Am I really making as much money as I think I am? Because maybe, you got a 10% raise and you're making 50 grand a year and you're like, hey, I'm making more money than most of my friends in high school. I'm doing pretty well. I've got a decent car. Like, I'm doing really well. And then you kind of ask yourself, like, could I be doing a lot better? And am I really working as hard as I could to make more money? And the answer you might get is like, I guess if I was really honest with myself, like, I know people who are making 10 times what I'm making. So maybe me pretending that my current income is impressive is just because I want to feel that way, not because it's actually true in reality. And when you start asking yourself those honest questions, I'm using the finance one because it's quantifiable, but when you really
Yeah.
start asking yourself those questions, you'll probably get answers you don't want to hear. And that's always a sign of progress. If the answer that comes back from that internal voice is like, no, dude, you got some work to do, like, you're lying to yourself. There's a lot more that you can be doing. You could be working harder. You could be waking up earlier. You could be calling your mom more. You could be showing up for your kids more. You could be eating healthier. When you really get honest and start admitting those things, you realize, wow, there's actually a much larger gap between who I am and who I could be than I realized. And that can be a wake up call in and of itself.
Absolutely. And where does finding one's life purpose come into play in this equation?
Yeah, it's very hard to be your full potential if your career is not aligned with your purpose in life.
Yeah.
And I'm really fortunate to be able to say that my career and my purpose in life are 99% overlap and 1% different. But that was not the case. And when I was working in finance before, I helped wealthy Canadians manage their investment portfolios. Um, I planned on doing that for the rest of my life. That was always my intent. And I liked that job because there's a lot of overlap with my personality, right? It allowed me a lot of freedom. There was no ceiling on my income. I got to set my own hours. I got to make my own decisions. I kind of got to do my own thing, which, sovereignty is obviously very important to me. It's my highest value, and it allowed me a lot of sovereignty, but there was no meaning in it. There was meaning in it in the sense that I got to help people live more abundant lives, and I got to talk to them about stressful issues in their life, and I got to comfort old ladies who would not feel secure financially except for me telling them everything's okay and showing them the plan. But for some people that I know in that industry, that is their highest calling. And they get enormous reward out of reducing people's financial stress and making them be able to go spend time with their kids instead of worrying about nickels and dimes. But it wasn't for me. That's not what I was meant to do. And when I gave that up, and it was a lot to give up because I was on the verge of doubling what was already a very good income. I was making a few hundred grand. It was about to double because I was buying somebody else's clients. So when I said no to that, it was not a decision I came to lightly, but I felt this calling, like, I'm going to limit who I am, even if I'm making a bunch of money, by not doing the thing I'm meant to do. And part of you will always know if you're choosing the path of comfort over the path of purpose. And that part of you that knows that will weaken you, and you'll be less than you could be. And women kind of have a built-in purpose, right? They're gonna, if they're the average woman, they're gonna have kids, and that's going to require a whole lot more out of them than any career would. There are some women with a really strong masculine energy. They need more than that. They need an external career. But men, none of us have that inbuilt purpose. And this is why there's so many men that just abandon their families. They're like, no, this is not enough. I'm going to go do something else. Men have to have a purpose. We're like creatures of burden. We need a burden to carry that we find is meaningful. If it's just a burden that produces a paycheck, it's not going to do the same thing. It's not going to light your soul on fire. You're not going to become that powerful, sovereign individual that you could be. And so for men, it's very important to find your purpose. And it doesn't mean quit your job and, whatever, start a mushrooms retreat, or something like that, right? Your purpose can also be outside of your career, and that can be wonderful. You can do something incredibly rewarding that has nothing to do with your career, and your career enables you to do that. That's wonderful. But the highest pinnacle of it is when you can really align your purpose in your career. And you'll also just do better at it. You'll make more money. You'll be happier. You'll be a better guy walking in the door at the end of the day. It's very difficult to overstate how important purpose is to men. And if you don't have your purpose, you need to find it.
Can your purpose be your family and or your relationship?
No. Um, it can be an enormous part of it, but my deep belief is that men have to have a priority outside of their family. And my greatest joy in life, the reason why I do everything in life, is all my family. But if I was working in a career that had nothing to do with my purpose, I would not be able to show up for them as the man that they need me to show up as. I would be showing up as a half version of myself, as a shell of who I could be. And part of it is kind of biological for men. Like you need a burden that's not just your wife and kids. You need something that you can be around your wife and kids and say, hey, I'm somebody who's important, who's getting things that I find meaningful done. And that can be anything. People find all sorts of different things meaningful. It doesn't matter what it is so much, as long as it's your thing. And you'll never show up for your wife and kids as fully as you could unless you have that purpose outside of the home. And I don't think that's true to the same degree for women. Again, for the ones with a more masculine streak, where they need that sense of accomplishment and overcoming, definitely. But there's a lot of women who their highest fulfillment in life is being a mom and taking care of their family and taking care of their home. It's a very rare man who that's enough for him to really feel like he's met his potential.
So how did you move from working in banking to finding your purpose? And how did you find your purpose? And first, what is your purpose?
My purpose is to use my wisdom and my experience to help men achieve a life of strength and freedom. And it was very messy trying to figure out what that is, because it took me a very long time to even figure out roughly what my purpose is. And then, okay, well, what do I actually do with that purpose? How do I turn that into a career? Do I do that as a financial advisor? Do I do that as a volunteer? Do I do that as a whole brand new career? And that's a very messy story of kind of the logistics of figuring that out. And we can get into that. But quickly, it was, I basically quit my job, sold my business, which was great because it provided me income for a few years to get the next thing going. Moved to Austin, Texas, and started Sovereign Man. And again, initially it was more focused on career and purpose, but it turned into helping people overcome the greatest pain I ever went through, which was being separated from Whitney. Because
Uh-huh.
we ended up being separated for a lengthy period of time. But I think maybe more interesting than that is how do you actually find your purpose? And there's a big kind of structure that I take clients through to get there. But one of the most important steps on it that's pretty easy to do on your own is a Japanese concept called Ikigai.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's the intersection of what you love, what you're good at, what you think the world needs, and what you can get paid for. And basically, to do that, you just draw four giant overlapping circles on a piece of large paper or Bristol board, and you write down everything you can think that you're good at, everything that you could think that you love, everything you think that you could do to make money, and everything you think the world needs. And you find where those things intersect. And what I kept coming back to, and part of this exercise is you ask other people their opinions on what you're good at. And everybody that asked what I was good at, not one of them said managing money or choosing investments. All of them said some version of you're good at taking complex ideas and making them easy to understand. You're a good teacher. You're a good explainer. And what I love doing kept coming back to learning and doing self-development, and specifically in the areas of like philosophy, psychology, self-improvement. And I thought the world needed more strong men. I thought that was part of the reason why we're in such a chaotic place, is that there are no strong men anymore. And I kept coming back to coaching being an obvious outcome of that. And this took me months of doing and redoing the Ikigai and trying to extract the themes. And but I kept coming back to coaching, and it was never something I was drawn towards. But the more I kept coming back to it, I was like, this really makes a lot of sense. And during that process, very slowly, I became so certain that I was meant to be in the coaching world that I almost couldn't stop myself from leaving my old career and starting the new one. So it definitely took courage, and it took, and I seemed crazy to everybody. And a lot of people told me that I was crazy, giving up this like spectacular career for like going to be some guy on Instagram. Like, what the hell are you doing?
Uh-huh.
You've got a family. Um, but I became so certain that this was my path that I couldn't help but follow it. And I felt like I had to. So although it did take courage, it was more like I just couldn't help myself. Like I had to do this thing. And that only came because I got radically clear on who I was meant to be, what my role was meant to be in the world. And again, it's a very messy process. It takes a very long time, but anybody can get there if they give it enough intention over a long enough period of time.
And I feel like you also went all in on it. Like, you went all in terms of your video editing and like your analytics, and like there's ways to build like an online platform. So like you invest in yourself in not just creating content, but on ways to maximize the eyes on that content, correct?
Definitely. So one of the things about finding your purpose is when you do find your purpose, you can look back at the rest of your life and all of it makes sense in light of your purpose. So the fact that I built the business in finance and then sold it and gave it away and then moved 3,000 miles away from Ottawa to Vancouver and rebuilt a new finance practice, I was pretty good at building businesses at that point because I was bad at it for long enough that I got good at it. And I was very bad at it initially, and I did not do particularly well. And I made tens of thousands of cold calls without any success, like just countless hours of just rejection and nothing working. Um, and there's a bunch of other things in my past where it's like, oh, that's why I had to learn that lesson. Because if I hadn't learned that lesson, if I hadn't built a finance business, which looking back, I had no interest in doing, I wouldn't have the skills necessary to do this. And one of the most important things I learned during that process was the power of failure. And so I was in a coaching group when I first started of like how to be a coach, how to build your online presence. And everybody's like, I'm going to post every day. And then what happens is they post 3 times and then they don't go viral and then they quit, or maybe they post every day for 2, 3 weeks. But by the time we hit a month in, almost nobody was posting any day anymore. And by the time we hit a year in, as far as I know, I was the only person doing it because
Yeah.
I knew from 20, 30,000 cold calls, eventually something will work. And if I'm humble enough to see where I'm going wrong and adapt and make the changes necessary, eventually this will work. And so for the first year that I went on Instagram, I went from 360 followers of like friends and family to like 2,400 followers or something. And so that was pretty clear evidence to everybody that knows and loves me and cares about me, except for my wife, that like, dude, you're on the wrong path. This is working. But after 400 videos in a row, one went viral a little bit and then went more viral. And then I started figuring out, oh, like this is kind of the angle that I should go. This is what's working. And then in a 6-month period, I grew by like 100,000 followers after that. Right. And
So
so
how did that happen? How did that video go viral, like in the first place? And
no insight or special powers or anything at all. It was just that process of like, just I'm not going to quit. And so one day, I needed a video. We didn't have one. And I was like, Whitney, like, I don't have any ideas, but I'm really good at like just answering questions. It's easier for me than like trying to come up with a script. So I scripted a bunch of my first videos, and that's part of why they didn't do well. I was like, I'm not good with a script. So
yeah,
like, Whitney, like, just ask me a question. And she's like, well, what? I'm like, I don't know, like relationships. And I don't know why that came to me. And she's like, what's wrong with relationships in 2024? And I was like, okay, 3 things, this, and this. It's like, whatever, didn't think anything of it. Like the bed was all messy behind me. We were in an Airbnb, and like, I wasn't looking very good. The lighting wasn't very good, but it took off. And I was like, oh, we're onto something here. And then I played with that for a few months, and I was like, okay, was it the relationship thing? Was it the fact that I was kind of a little bit more negative and pointing out holes in things? Was it the background? Was it that Whitney asked me a question that I answered? And we figured out after kind of playing around with that for a couple months, like, oh, when Whitney asks me a question, it always does better than if I just talk in front of the camera. And I've since figured out why that is, which is like having a beautiful woman ask you a question gives you immediate authority. It makes it seem like you're worth listening to. I'm better. Questions make a good hook to get people's attention. It makes us different than everybody else because it's a husband and wife talking about relationships. So like we stand out from a brand perspective that people recognize us more easily because it's a recognizable format. But it wasn't that I figured any of that out because I'm a genius at social media and then I went and did it. It's like I just failed and listened to the feedback 400 times in a row until it started working,
hmm.
which is a level of shame and rejection that most people just are unwilling to go through. Because everybody knew I gave up an enormous earning potential career to go be some idiot who thinks he can give advice on Instagram, right? So everybody knew that I was doing something completely irresponsible and moronic, and everybody saw me failing every single day for a year.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I had failed at another career long enough to succeed at it, and I deeply understood you have to be the fool in order to be the hero. That's why so many hero movies start out with the guy being kind of a blundering idiot who just makes mistakes and is irresponsible and gets beat up by a little girl, but then ends up going on to kill the bad guy at the end. You have to be the fool in order to be the hero. And I, at that point in my life, I understood that deeply enough that I was willing to be the fool. And I thought the only way that I actually stay the fool is if I quit before I become the hero. And so I was like,
Uh-huh.
the universe is going to give up before I do. Like I will keep this going. And
Yeah.
luckily it clicked.
And I feel like you have to like step into the fear. Um, what's your relationship with fear? How has that evolved on your path?
We're very close friends. Um, what I did with fear for the first 30 years of my life is I tried to overcome it by blocking it out and acting in spite of it. And there are times in your life where you're going to be afraid and you have to force yourself to do something. It's very important to have that ability, but that's not going to take you that far, generally speaking. So when I changed my relationship with fears, I kind of made it my friend. And every time I was afraid, this is part of that period of introspection I went through. I said, why am I afraid? Where is this coming from? What's the fear trying to protect me from? What's the lesson contained in the fear? And I got to know fear really, really well. And I got to view it as an ally rather than something to be avoided. And on top of that, what I did with fear is I always played out the worst case scenario. So when I decided to leave my job and go on Instagram, what I did is I said, okay, this is terrifying and rightly so. What am I afraid of? And I wrote it all down. And it was some version of, I'll do this. And I think at that time, I was like, my worst fear was like 6 months. And 6 months from now, I'll have no followers. I'll be getting bad feedback. People will be thinking I'm really awkward on camera and I'm giving bad advice. And I'll eventually have to go crawling back to my finance business, or I'll have to try to get a job with somebody that I know, or I'll have to borrow money, and my family will like be kind of destitute, and I'll be restarting at 40 instead of restarting at 35 or younger than that, 33. Um, and like my whole life will fall apart. Whitney will leave me because she just can't handle being broke anymore. And this public humiliation that I went through, my kids won't respect me. And like maybe I'll never recover and I'll just kind of accept some crappy job that I hate and I'll end up doing that for the rest of my life. And I'll like be on my deathbed thinking like I wasted my life. And
Uh-huh.
I thought all of that through. And I was like, am I willing to accept that that's a possible outcome? And I was like, yes. And when you look at your worst, deepest, darkest fears and your answer is like, yeah, I'll face that, it doesn't have the same sting. So the fear doesn't become debilitating in the same way where it's like, whoa, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to look at that. Like, I'm not doing this thing. I'm like, no, no, that's a possibility. And like, let's play. I don't want that to happen. I'm going to fight with every cell in my body to make sure that doesn't happen. But like, I know that's a possibility. I'm not hiding it from myself. I'm willing to take that risk. And then the fear isn't some unknown monster that you can't see. The fear is a known monster that you can see, you know its name, you know how to fight it, and it's not as afraid. The fear of the unknown is always far worse than fear of the known.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I'm surprised you didn't say, like, the thing that came to my mind when I thought what you're gonna say is like that you'd lose everything. And I guess that's like what my fear is from taking like a big leap, um, is just like losing everything that I've built, like all my assets, all my finances that I've accumulated, and just losing that. But I do know even if I did lose that, I'm good. Like, I know I'll be fine. And but
Yeah.
there's still that fear. But I know for certainty if I lost everything, I'd be fine.
Yeah, and that
Um,
was another part of it is like that was one part of it is like playing out the worst case scenario, but I also played out the like not so bad scenario and the mediocre scenario and the pretty good scenario and the really good scenario. So I had the future mapped out to the point where it wasn't the unknown anymore. It was like, okay, there's a bunch of knowns. And my assessment of it like was that realistically it's not going to turn out as badly as it could. Realistically, it's probably going to be like at least okay if I do it for long enough. And I can at least make enough money to like keep my family in a decent house and have one decent car and have decent groceries. Um, so I played out all those scenarios, and again, a big reason why I was able to do this was one of the realistic scenarios was this doesn't work and I have to rebuild something else. And it's like, okay, well then I'm 2 years behind and I have to do something else. But I've built two businesses before. I know I can do this. And yeah, maybe I won't end up working exactly in my purpose. I'll kind of have to do something that I'm not as excited about, but I can still make that work. I can still live a fulfilling life. I can still have the respect and love of my family. I can still, eat steak once a week. I'll be okay. Most likely outcome is that I'll be okay. So that was
mhm.
definitely a big part of it.
Yeah. So I'm just trying to think about situations with your clients, and also like a situation where I kind of find myself in right now too. Is like I've taken the leaps before, gone into teaching yoga full time, working in the film industry for the last 5 years, coaching MMA, and I made all those work for what they needed to be, but those just weren't the things. And so now I find myself in a place where I'm ready to take that next big leap, but I like have no clue where that is going to be. Um, so what would you advise me or someone in a similar situation? And
Yeah. So there's a couple of things. Um, the first thing is take a really long look at all of those experiences and analyze what did I like and dislike about each of them. So I liked this about teaching yoga, but I didn't like this. I liked this about teaching MMA, but I didn't like this. I liked this about film, but I didn't like this. And when you have that list of like the things that you didn't like and you did like, you can then say, okay, is there a way that I can combine this where I'm getting all the stuff that I did like without all the stuff I didn't like? And if you spend enough time on that, you will get an answer that might work for you.
well, the answer that came to my mind right away is like you're turning like something that you're passionate about into a job, and then when I feel like whenever I do that, then it's like you're no longer like you're no longer passionate about, like you like that thing a lot less,
Yeah,
because you're
I've
reliant
experienced
on
that
it.
too. Yeah, because I thought my passion for a long time was philosophical ideas because that's what I spent all my free time doing, and I read all the nature philosophers and everything. But I hated teaching it. Like it was just boring to me. Like, and I realized like, oh, I like doing this for myself. I don't actually like doing this with other people.
Yeah.
So it's tricky. That's why it's a messy process, right? But one other thing you can do that's kind of more practical, but it's really helpful is something called the skill stack. And this is an idea I first came across from Scott Adams, who's the Dilbert cartoonist. And
Yeah.
his how he came up with this idea, and there's a bunch of different versions. This is his version. Is he was in a office job that he found really unfulfilling, and he wanted to do something else, but he's like, what can I do? Like, I don't have that many skills. And so he started looking at what his skills were, and he basically came up with his three best skills were like, I'm a pretty good office worker, I'm a pretty good artist, but not that good, and I'm pretty funny, but not that funny. Well, what can I do with that? And he's like, could I turn those skills into $100 million skill stack? And he's like, well, if I combined not being a good office worker or being a mediocre office worker with being a pretty good artist and a pretty good comedian, that might make me a world-class cartoonist. And I have a different angle than everybody else has. Maybe that's actually a unique skill stack that nobody else on earth has in the same way that I do. And it turns out he was right. It was a $100 million skill stack. And when you think about it from that perspective, you end up learning about yourself things you hadn't known before. And you're like, hey, is there a way, and I'm making this up, I'm not saying there's anything to this, but like, could I combine film and yoga and MMA in a way where I'm actually the only person on earth who could do this, where nobody else has that same skill stack that I have? And going back to the Ikigai, could I do it in a way where I make the money I want to make? Because I'm going to, let's say you don't want to get paid hourly, you want to get paid, per client, or you want to get paid residual income or passive income, like whatever your preferred income source is. Could I get paid in that way and actually enjoy what I'm doing? It's like, well, you know what, if I look at it that way, this is kind of a new idea, but maybe I'd be the only person doing that, or maybe I could do it better than everybody else because nobody else has MMA experience or nobody else has film experience. Could you come up with like, do you have $100 million or $1 million a year skill stack already? You just haven't taken the time to figure out how you could combine those skills in a way that makes you truly world class.
Yeah, I know. I definitely feel there's something there. So I
And there
appreciate
is,
that.
because if you find your purpose, you look back and you'll go, I could have never done this if I didn't have MMA and yoga and film and these other three things. There's no way I could have done this. Holy
Yeah, there's
shit,
some
that's
other stuff
why
too.
I ended up here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I'm excited to kind of sit more with that concept and journal about that and look at that a bit deeper. You've shared so much great information in this conversation, and it's not all come through you. You've had different mentors and allies and helpers on your path that have helped you. Let's just take a moment to acknowledge some of those people. There's many, so we don't have to name them all. But who has been some big influences on your journey? Who were they, and what were your primary takeaways you learned from them that you've incorporated into your being?
So I'm going to give you maybe a bit of a different answer to that. Most of my mentors are people that I've never interacted with or who have been dead for a long time.
Yeah, that's okay.
Um, I'm a very, very introverted person, and I learn really effectively by myself. And so, and I also have a lot of very strong opinions and perspectives that don't jive with other people. And I don't like taking advice from people who I don't respect and whose values I don't share. And most of those people were out of reach for me until quite recently. So the people that made the biggest impact on me, well, one person that's a real mentor would be Calvin Townsend, who is a professor at Trinity Western University, which was, I was very much a gung-ho evangelical back in the day. And he was a professor there, but who was very much not your typical evangelical. And we drank together and smoked cigarettes together and went golfing together. And he had just such an incredible passion for ideas. Most of my other professors, and many of them wanted me to do my PhD and they supervised my graduate studies, but they were very much academic, right? It was like, this is what Nietzsche thinks, and this is what whoever Plato thinks. Um, he was inspired by the ideas and he lived the ideas and he got excited about the ideas. And so he really taught me that enjoying and being inspired by these ideas, like that's what matters and that's what's exciting. And so he taught me that. This is part of why I dropped out of graduate philosophy. Was I don't really want to like read a bunch of academic perspectives on this book. I just want to read the book and I want to learn what I can learn from the book. So that really changed the trajectory of my life. Um, After that was Jordan Peterson. And I had been introduced to him before he blew up, just through a random kind of coincidence. I got introduced to his ideas, and he was the first person where I was like, he brought in the psychological perspective, and he brought in Carl Jung, and he brought in that internal aspect of looking at yourself and your past. And Jung is the biggest answer to your question. And I got introduced to him through Jordan Peterson. And Jordan Peterson, before I go there, Jordan Peterson, what's amazing about him, what makes him not just a self-help guru that most people think he is he's playing this enormous epochal role in bringing science and religion back together. And science and religion split a few hundred years ago, and to the detriment of everything. And he made religion scientifically palatable for the first time. And I don't think you can understand his historic importance without understanding how important that is, that he's kind of the single figure who's done the most to reunite those ideas.
Mhm.
And he made the spirit, the soul, God relevant to me again because he introduced me to that world. And he also relies more than probably any other thinker on Jung. And Jung, I'd always kind of dismissed because he was kind of like woo woo and mystical. And although he's like, him and Freud are the two great titans of psychology, people don't really study Jung in a serious way because he's way too complex and he gets into religious, spiritual, alchemical ideas that people find not academic. So he kind of gets brushed aside. And Jung was the missing piece for me that helped me finally understand Nietzsche for the first time, understand Plato for the first time, understand all these great thinkers that I'd read a whole bunch, but I never really grasped on a deep cellular level. And Jung helped me understand that so much of what we see on the external world is actually an internal phenomenon. It helped me to go inside. And when you do that, when you unify the external world and the internal world, it's like a fucking superpower. Everything becomes more clear. You understand what movies mean. You understand what your wife means. You understand what matters to you and what's meaningful. And although I'd read pretty much every other major thinker in the Western tradition, I'd never really read Jung. And reading Jung changed everything for me. And the impact that he had on me is he brought meaning back into my life. He got me out of that scientific mindset where everything is logical and empirical and what you can smell and taste and touch and measure. And he showed me that the spiritual dimension is real and that it's worth studying and that you can study it in a rigorous and formal way. It doesn't have to just be some woo-woo personal experience. There's something that there's meat to it. And that changed everything for me. Being introduced to Jung, which led me to alchemy, which led me to esotericism, which led me to ancient mystical schools and ancient religious practices, that changed everything for me. So Jung, although he died before I was born, by far the most profound impact on who I am and why I'm able to live like a really fulfilling, enriching life right now.
Mhm. And you mentioned that Jordan, like Peterson, merged like religion and science, right?
Yeah.
And you yourself was raised as in the Protestant church,
Yes.
and you left. You kind of got away from that in your adulthood, and then you returned to that. If I'm correct?
Kind of. Yeah.
Um,
So yeah,
yeah, go
like
ahead.
I kind of left the Protestant church, not really intentionally. I just kind of stopped going because I didn't find that there was much there for me.
Yeah,
And I went through, kind of my period wandering through the desert for 10 years.
yeah,
And I wouldn't have necessarily called myself an atheist then. I kind of referred to myself as an agnostic. I kind of, yeah, there might be something, but I'm not really sure what it is.
yeah,
But looking back, I was very much an atheist in what I really believed. Like intellectually, what you believe and what you actually believe are not the same thing, right? I can say I believe in honesty, but if I lie to everybody, well, I actually don't believe in honesty, right?
yeah.
And so I thought I believed something different than I believed. And I was very much an atheist. And Jordan Peterson taught me to reread the Bible, to reread the Bhagavad Gita, to reread any religious text with new eyes. And so the Bible, though I read it several times and I read parts of it hundreds of times, it never I didn't sink in for me. It didn't land anywhere because I was like, there's just so many inconsistencies. And I was reading the Bible like so many Protestants do, as kind of a scientific historical account of creation in the world. So like the Genesis creation myth to me was like, this is a scientific account. And that, I realized that wasn't the case at a very young age. But I still read the Bible that way. Like I read it through a scientific lens, and I didn't realize that this is a document about meaning and man's relationship with the divine, and it's meant to be read in that way. It's meant to be read more like you would read poetry or mythology than you would read a history document or a biology textbook. And when I got that sort of Jungian understanding of how to read texts like this, I got to go back and reread all the same stories that I read 1,000 times, and I was like, holy shit, I get it now. This is real, and this is not only like it makes sense. It's more real than this desk is wood and it's verifiable. There's a depth of meaning and a depth of real that's deeper, and that transformed everything for me. And it allowed me to return to the faith of my childhood from a very different perspective. It's kind of like spiral dynamics, right? You start in a circle and then you kind of move, sorry, you start at a point and then you move in this upward moving circle. And so if you're looking top down, it looks like you've just done a circle and returned to the same place. But if you look at it from the side, you're at the same place, but at a much higher vantage point. And
Yeah.
that's what it did for me. So I was able to return to the faith of my childhood, but from a radically different perspective. And so you won't find me in church anytime soon, unfortunately. Um, I Most Christians wouldn't consider me a Christian because I would call myself like an esoteric Christian. It's kind of like a Christian who allows for insight and wisdom of other traditions to impact his belief systems. I have practices from other religions that I incorporate into my spiritual practice. But I very much do consider myself a Christian and a very, very deep one, just certainly not in like a traditional sense.
Yeah, and it's interesting because like the Bible talks about like we are all one. I'm trying to I have a passage of that like that. And I heard you talk about that on one of your podcasts too, like Jew and Gentile, like circumcised, uncircumcised, whatever that passage is. Um, you familiar with what I'm talking about?
Yeah, it's for the Greek and the Jew, or yeah, I know the passage. I think it's
Yeah,
in
here
Matthew.
I have it here. It's like in this new life, it doesn't matter if you're a Jew or Gentile, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbaric, uncivilized, slave or free. Christ, the Messiah, is all that matters, and He lives in all of us.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, so it's no matter your religion, there's something commonality in all in all of us, and I think a lot of religions forget that fact, and they're othering
Yeah,
everyone.
yeah, and Islam and Christianity stand apart from all other religions in the way that they other everyone else. If it's not directly from the tradition of Muhammad, it's demonic. If it's not directly biblical and if it's not the name Jesus Christ, it's demonic. And I think that's a demonic worldview to look at a beautiful, kind, loving Buddhist who's done a tremendous amount of work to merge themselves with the divine and to say, well, that person worships Buddha, they're demonic. It's like, that's an evil perspective to have and not one that any sane God would have.
And
And
yeah,
I think, that Christ is in all of us. One of the things I really struggled with in my more fundamentalist days was like, well, what about the people who like live on an island and they've never had the opportunity to learn about Jesus?
yeah,
Doesn't really seem fair that they go to hell. But if Christ is in all of us, you might call Christ by a different name, or you might have a different aspect of Christ that you understand, because none of us understand Christ fully. We get a little piece or enough to understand that we can create a connection and a relationship. But maybe you can do that through studying the Buddhic texts. Maybe you can do that through studying Hinduism. Maybe you can get an aspect of the divine. And although you don't know the name, you're still tapping into the same energy, the same being, the same Christ consciousness that you'd be tapping into somewhere else. And um, that's allowed me to access these different vantage points on the divine and learn. It's like the divine is like a many-faceted crystal. Depending on what angle you're looking at it, it's going to appear to be a different shape, and you're only going to see that side of the crystal. But if you look at all the different world religions, you get a much fuller view of what the divine actually is. Because we all, and every Christian knows this, we all have a very limited understanding of God. The definition of God does not contain inside of it the total reality of God. The total reality of God is beyond being able to put into words. And so having a perspective from different traditions, I think, is very helpful for a Christian. And I think that's something that's really important, actually.
I agree, and I feel it's like the same thing like with like yoga or MMA. Like there's just different styles of yoga, but they're all pointing at the same thing. There's different styles of combat, and it's all bringing you to the same place. And if you analyze all the religions, like it's all pointing its finger
Mhm.
at the same thing, and they all have different lenses, but they'll help you better see that thing. Um,
Especially with the more mystical branches, because the fundamentalist branches of Islam and Christianity and Judaism, they have very tight definitions that are very specific, and there's less overlap there. But if you look at Sufi Islam and mystical Christianity and the Kabbalah in Judaism and Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism and Hinduism, if you look at the mystical strains in all of them, they all believe almost exactly the same thing, almost
uh,
exactly the same thing. And that unifying belief system is, I think, what we need to focus on. It's like, what do we all agree on, and whether or not you think, um, this is the age where you're allowed to do that, or whether it's 12 or 15 that you're allowed to do this thing. Is that really where we want to break down our communication and just say, oh, they're all going to hell? Or
Uh-huh.
maybe the beautiful thing that you get access to, whether it's at age 12 or 15, that we both believe in, that's really where the truth lies. And maybe we don't know as much as we think we are. Maybe we're just being arrogant and prideful and fallen and sinful by thinking that we have it figured out so well that I can say, if you don't believe in this aspect of Jesus, you're going to hell. It's like, that's a demonic belief, in my opinion.
Yeah. So how do you practice your faith if you don't feel yourself aligned with like the majority viewpoint of like the Protestant or just the Christian faith?
I practice my faith in the same way that I practice a lot of things, which is by myself. And again, that's largely my personality. I'm a very introverted person. I'll literally go months without socializing before I feel the desire to pick up the phone and hang out with somebody. And I never get to those months because my friends call me before then, and my wife's hyper extroverted. So my social cup is always overflowing. So it never
Yeah.
gets empty, not that I want to fill it. But I practice alone. And that can be, turning off all the lights in my house and taking a shower in complete darkness and praying. That can be doing exercises from mystical Judaism to turn on the energy centers in my body, the stuff that very likely Jesus would have studied, because this is the same thing they've been teaching for thousands of years, to the high level, I want to say priests, rabbis in Judaism.
Yeah.
And it might be doing yoga, it might be doing breath work, it might be doing an esoteric practice from Rosicrucian Christianity that allows you a connection with the divine. And what I found is the more that I do of that, God ceases to be this definitional intellectual concept, and God becomes a living, breathing reality that I can feel inside of myself, that I can tap into for guidance, that I can dialogue with. And it's not like a dialogue like you and I are having. We don't have a proper word to describe it. It's very different. Um, but through these practices, you learn to recognize and distinguish between the voice in your head and the voice of God. And so when you get those kind of impulses that this is the thing I'm meant to be doing, you say, hey, is this me telling me this, or is this coming from somewhere else that's bigger and that's divine? And you learn to recognize the difference between those things, so that you actually have what all Christianity is aiming at, which is a direct relationship. Evangelicals say, you have a relationship with Jesus, and it always kind of sounds like they're talking about a boyfriend or something when they say that. But you can actually have a direct connection to the divine, and you can open up that conduit. And there are specific practices you can do that allow you to further open that conduit and to connect more closely with the divine, and go through this process of theosis, which is the Eastern Orthodox concept of salvation. So Protestants, it's like you make a statement of belief, and from that moment you're saved. That's the salvation process. For Eastern Orthodox, which was the only form of Christianity for 1,000 years and is by far the most close to the original form of Christianity that Jesus's direct disciples would have practiced, salvation is not a moment and a statement of belief. It's an ongoing process of merging with the divine. And so
Hmm.
the longer you're on this journey and committed to it and doing the practices, who you are should begin to fall away, to be replaced with Christ. And so that even if you still feel the feelings like Jesus would have felt, like, hey, I don't want to go get nailed to this cross, your own impulses and motivations and desires are insubstantial compared to the impulses and motivations and desires that you're getting from a direct connection with the divine. And I'm very much not far on that journey, and there's a whole lot of me, and there's way more of me than there is of that, and I'm very cognizant of that. But what I want my journey of salvation to look like is my desires strip and fall away, and although I still feel them, when I actually make a decision, I'm making that decision under the light of God, trying to merge my will with his will and have his will be done, not mine. And again, there are practices that help you do this and become more effective at this, and none of them are taught in Protestantism. You kind of get some rough advice like do your daily devotions. That was never helpful for me. So
Yeah.
these other things are much more helpful, and I consider them a much deeper form of Christianity than the Christianity that I grew up with.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And like what it inspires me to do is just to continue studying. Um, and that's what you've been doing, right? Like you're studying these texts and seeing what works for you and practicing them. Um, so thank you for that. You've shared so much on this conversation. I have one final question. Through all the highs and lows that is your hero's journey, what do you feel has been your greatest life lesson you've learned on the path that you feel called in this moment to share with me and whoever's tuning in?
Um, be radically honest with yourself. Stop hiding from yourself. Um, Hiding things from yourself is a lie. It's a deception. It's a sin. And anything that you hide from yourself distorts your ability to move effectively through the world and to become the man that you're meant to be and do the things that you're meant to do. And unless you develop the capacity to recognize your own deceit, and not necessarily to recognize that you lied to your mom or you lied to your friends, but that you lied to yourself, unless you recognize that inside of yourself, you're not going to get much better in any category of your life. And that's kind of the first step to taking responsibility, is being aware of things that you're doing wrong, the lies you tell yourself, where you tell yourself, well, I did a good job and you didn't. I instead of saying, well, I could have handled that better. And although this person said some horrible things to me, I actually played a role in that. And the energy that I brought to the conversation and the resentment that I feel inside of myself that I've been pretending I don't feel, that will create a barrier between you and that person. It'll create a barrier between you and financial success. It'll create a barrier between you and physical fitness and health. The most powerful thing you can do is close your eyes or take out a pen and paper and ask yourself, like, if I really wanted to be honest with myself, where am I full of shit? And I know it. And you'll get an answer. And the more you hate that answer, the more truth there is contained within it. And it's painful and it's horrible. And it'll make you feel worse before it'll make you feel better. But without that, nothing good will come your way. So to put it in Christian terms, like the log in your own eye, that's where everything begins.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So for people wanting to connect with you, Matt, you're most busy on Instagram, the underscore sovereign man. They can connect with you there, send you DMs, and you'll get back to whoever reaches out. And then you've just more recently been uploading stuff on YouTube as well, and like expanding yourself on that platform. And it's the same place to find you, the underscore sovereign man. Then you got to add on Matt Enns to for sure find you.
Yeah. So Instagram, the underscore sovereign underscore man, and very active in the DMs there. So you can reach out to me there. YouTube, we put up 4 videos. A bunch of things had to happen that are taking up a lot of time. So that's kind of on pause. I'm hoping to resume it next week, but I might be planning to resume it next week for another 4 weeks. I don't know. But YouTube, we're becoming active there. You have to search Matt Enns, the sovereign man, to actually find me.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, Instagram is definitely the best place to get a hold of me. And yeah, if you're looking to do some of this internal work and you want some guidance, you want some one-on-one coaching, you want to be coached in a group environment, we've got a couple hundred active clients right now. So we've got a very active group of incredibly supportive men. And if you just want coursework, videos to watch, written exercises to take yourself through, and you want to take, that solo path, we've got options for all of those. And we're certainly happy to explain any of that to you. So reaching out on Instagram is the best move.
Amazing. To close every conversation, we bring our fist in, a digital fist bump. Boom. Welcome to the winner circle. Thank you so much, Matt.
This is a pleasure, man. It was a great discussion, and I really, really enjoyed it. So thank you so much.
Cheers. I appreciate your time.
Awesome.